Well, on Monday night, there was a Centre for Social Justice event. Now, for anyone whose eyebrows are raised, the think tank was set up by Ian Duncan Smith, so former head of the Conservative Party. Yeah. So they don't mean social justice in the way that it's been captured, but obviously the name is now radioactive. But point being, the intention... Well, they didn't at the time.
You're telling me to trust the social intentions of a former Tory member?
I'm saying that he's a well-intentioned boomer that doesn't understand what's happening.
This does not fill me with
the quiet man of politics. Do you remember that when he gave himself that moniker?
Not great.
Very
no.
cringeworthy.
But anyway, look, the point is the event that was on was actually pretty good. And the reason I say that is because some friends of the show were participating in it. So Miriam Cates was spearheading it. Fantastic MP, about one of the only good ones left in the Tory party at this point. Rosie Duffield was meant to be on it, who is not a friend. She was former MP at Canterbury, who decided to dogpile on our student society for inviting coal back in 2018, and has since been devoured by the crocodile of her own party over gender ideology, to the point of where she couldn't show up to the event because she was afraid for her safety. Now, I will say...
Crying shame.
Yeah, she shouldn't be hounded off of this. Not very nice thing to do, but also don't feed the beast if that's the case for it. Then there was also Philip Pilkington, who has worked for ARC and has done a paper on demographics we'll be mentioning later. He'll be coming in to be interviewed. And the wonderful Stephen Shaw, who I've spoken to on our website in the following interview on the pandemic of unplanned childlessness because of his film Birth Gap. And the whole point of the event was to discuss demographic decline in various countries. This is specific to England, though. Stephen Shaw went around the world and said pretty much every country except for Israel at this point is having declining birth rates. Israel has about 2.5 because it has... religious and ethnic-specific migration policies and a stable economy, so it's actually encouraging religious minorities globally to have children in its country. But the rest of the world is below sub-replacement, which is 2.1 babies per woman. India's just dipped below that. Sub-Saharan Africa is above replacement birth rate, but every single decade they're losing at least one child. So trying to import the whole third world to make up for your falling birth rates not only has problems with the economy and problems with culture and ethnic tensions, but it also isn't going to work long term. All of these things are very sensible policies and discussion topics. For some reason, we haven't been able to talk about that for the last how many years because, oh my God, you're racist if you notice that your essentially native population is going extinct because you're not having babies. Very frustrating. But it's good that it's being had as a discussion now in the building adjacent to Parliament, which is Portcullis House. Now, Shaw wrote a piece about this a little while ago for the Spectator. I'm just going to put some numbers in context here because the situation's pretty dire. He's worked out that by 2050, 800 million people are going to suffer from unplanned childlessness. That basically means that it's people who had wanted to have families but didn't find the time, the economic circumstances went against them, they didn't have a partner, and various factors had pushed them away from meeting someone. And about 80% of those people who don't have children by that time wanted them. Only 10% had suffered from fertility issues, 10% didn't want them because of climate change or whatever, right? And so he worked out the numbers for each country. The UK last year has had 900,000 adults celebrate their 50th birthday and only 700,000 births. So that's a 23% birth gap. So it's the first time that's happened, I believe, of where the number of pensioners had eclipsed the number of newborns. Obviously driven in part by the pandemic and lockdowns, but economic instances often have a knock-on effect. US has a 15% gap, France 24%, Germany 35%, Spain and Japan both 55%. I think Japan's one of the worst birth rates in the world. I think it's 115th out of 127. It's like 1.2 children per woman at this point.
I'll just quickly check. That's very interesting, isn't it? Because that suggests to me that it's something to do with development rather than necessarily Western culture. Right?
Yes. Yeah, seemingly so.
It's not just Western culture. It's something about having a high standard of living and or developed society or something.
Yeah, well, lower infant mortality means that if your children are alive for longer, you're trying for less children because you have to support them. There's also the implication that the birth control pill has done this to the West. Now, that's not the case in Japan because Japan didn't adopt the pill until 1990. And in the moment in Japan, only 3% of women are on the pill at all. But around the same time in the 70s, there was an oil shock that hit South Korea, Italy, Germany, and Japan, and all their birth rates went off a cliff, and they've never recovered since. So adverse economic circumstances are also part of it.
Does Japan not also have a surplus of men in comparison to the amount of women it has, as far as I'm aware?
I'm not sure about the exact population of that, but I do know that the hikikomori are a growing constituency of men. So there are many men taking themselves out of the dating pool entirely. So also cultural phenomenons at work here. South Korea's got 71% birth gap. I think that's the worst in the world at this point. I think there are more dog owners than there are parents in South Korea.
Bloody hell.
Yeah, so that's really bad. Interestingly enough, the reason isn't fewer children, as in per family. It's fewer people having children overall. So if you have a child, your likelihood of having more children is much higher. But it's just people are never having any children in the first place that's going up.
Could you argue that there is a, given the selective pressures right now for the sorts of people who would choose to have families as opposed to those who would choose not to have families by choice, not necessarily because they've been put into circumstances where they can't financially or can't because they can't find a partner. Could you argue that there is a soft eugenics process going on? Not to, qualify that positively or negatively.
I don't.
Just to state that it appears, because I know that Ed Dutton, who was at the ARC conference that you were at last week, has written a book about the potential conservative future purely because of the fact that it's more conservative-minded people who are having more children as opposed to liberally-minded people.
Eric Kaufman's done 2 books about this. I'm talking to him tomorrow, actually, and he's done The Religious Will Inherit the Earth. As we've already seen with Israel, Orthodox Jews are having children at rates higher than other sectors of Jews, but all religious Jews in that country have a higher birth rate than pretty much everywhere else. Same with the Amish in America, same with Catholics in the general diaspora. So yes, it is trending towards conservative birth rates as well, because for some reason, liberal and woke-minded people have, well, many reasons, made abortion and cosmetic sterilization, YouTube, a sacrament for themselves.
I was about to mention there is also the ideological demographics of abortion.
The issue is, though, is that of the people that aren't having these children, the overwhelming majority of them are reporting that they want them or would have liked them. It's only about 10% of the people that don't end up having kids have no kids for ideological reasons. So what's happening here is a vast majority of people are just not having the families that they've always wanted to have due to various life circumstances and reasons. It might be the cultural narrative, it might be economic circumstances, it might be their inability to find a partner, it might be delaying their fertile years because of education, but a sort of conflagration of issues are converging on this generation and stopping them having kids. And it's not just in Britain, it's around the world, but obviously this event was mainly focused on Britain. There's a little passage here about Britain. The number of childless people in the UK has grown to 1 in 4 over the past 5 decades, yet the number of children that mothers are having has increased slightly from 2.3 in the 70s to 2.4 today. In Japan, the figure for childlessness is 1 in 3, yet 6% of mothers are having 4 or more children, exactly the same as in 1973. In Italy, 2 in 5 women are childless, while the average mother is having 2.2. US, childless women is trending towards 1 in 3, but the average mother is having 2.6 children, up from 2.4 in the 70s. This confirms the idea that we're moving towards smaller families is a myth. Childlessness alone has driven our overall birth rates to ultra-low levels. And this isn't something that people are discussing. And so Miriam Cates, ahead of the event, decided to do a bit of polling on what women actually want. Do they want these children or not? Are they all sacrificing their families for the climate, as Greta Thunberg keeps telling them? And she says, exclusive polling commission for the event shows that 92% of young women want children and that the average number of children desired is 2.4, so above birth rate. In other words, if women were able to have the number of children they actually wanted, we wouldn't have a problem. A problem which the establishment seems to think mass migration is the only solution to. So, various factors are converging on this generation to not have the families that they want in order to manufacture consent for battery farming Africans into infinity. And that's not particularly desirable for multiple reasons, as we've mentioned time and time again on this podcast. If you want to look at the rest of the stats, they have been published in full on the new Social Covenant Unit. Thanks very much to Imogen for that. It says 92.4% of young women hope to become mothers. When asked how many children they'd like to have once barriers are removed, 18 to 24-year-olds wanting 2.25 and 25 to 35-year-olds want 2.41. Of those not wanting or unsure about having children in the future, 44% cited needing to feel as though they could afford enough childcare, 41% wanting to move into a first or larger home, and 41% said they want to become less economically vulnerable. So even of the people who are saying, I don't want kids yet, those factors are all conditional on I don't feel I could have them. So again, lots of people want them, various reasons as why they're not having them. And so what's this leading to? Bit of a scary statistic that came out of an ARC report from Philip Pilkington, who sat on this panel. And we'll get to Philip in a moment, because noticing demographic trends is apparently enough to be shouted at. Many such cases. He discovered in this paper, that we'll be discussing on the channel soon, that if current demographic and birth rate trends continue, the UK in 2083 will be 54% first-generation immigrant. First generation. Not just the children who may not feel connected to the area. First generation. So people that have come over as economic chancers, have been invited over because we haven't been able to fill apparently all these job vacancies that keep cropping up, as you've covered before, many oftentimes ghost jobs as well.
Oh yeah, a lot of them are managers trying to put out the feelers to their own staff members saying, don't worry, I know you're overworked, but we've got jobs coming in, we'll have new people started, and they never actually take anyone on, or they're mandated from their own upper departments to put them out there, or to just have, say, like call centers. A lot of call centers will have perpetual job offers, even if all of the positions are filled, because they have such a high rate of turnover. But every single one of these will be classified in ONS data as a job vacancy that needs to be filled, which is why one of the reasons why you can justify mass migration, even though these jobs don't exist or will never be filled or were never meant to be filled.
And it's total false assumption that suddenly, by arriving on British soil, they're going to be transplanted into fully patriotic and integrated British citizens, because people hold cultural prejudices.
Soil's magic, bro.
Oh yeah, if you just give someone a passport, they're instantly going to be waving the Union Jack, I'm sure.
Makes sense to me.
It's genuinely a cultural extinction event to say that the majority of your population only arrived here yesterday. And that is not a prejudicial or racist statement. And I'm tired of people saying that it is. The problem is that people within the Conservative camp say it is. Now, this should surprise no one, because, of course, there have always been Tory wets acting as containment. There are even a few that tried to infiltrate ARC, which was frustrating, but it seems, at least with stuff like this, it's going to be trending in this direction in future. And so I wanted to reference the event. Now, it's in full and it's live streamed on the Centre for Social Justice's Twitter accounts. You can go and watch it back if you like. I apologise that the volume is not great. We've done our best to clean some of it up. But there was a Q&A session, and the event was chaired by Fraser Nelson. If anyone doesn't know him, he is one of the lead editors over at The Spectator. Now, Fraser is often invited to these sorts of panel events. He chaired Miriam's event talking about the online harms bill at a Conservative Party conference, so he's quite a high-profile journalist. When Philip was talking about the findings of his report in a very scientific, explanative way, I don't think there were really any value judgments laden in what he said. Just noticing the fact that Britain would be majority immigrant was enough to warrant shouting him down. I'm going to play a couple of clips. One of them's quite long, so I can pause it at any point if requested. Just because I thought I'd raise your blood pressure, boys. So let's see if we can listen to this.
I've got a question and we'll open it up to the floor. No, Phil, it's a very striking presentation. But I go from this for normally at CSJ events, I'm in agreement with most of the panelists. Tonight, not particularly. So I'll get my questions out of the way. But Philip, you're presenting that immigrants as a shared population, almost like some kind of threat. Now, this is what I can't understand. I mean, we are living, take this wonderful city of ours, London. You've got 60% of the children in the city are born to an immigrant mother. As far as I can work out, that means it's one of the most successful melting pots in the world. What's to worry about? Where's the danger?
Well, you just said 60% are born to immigrant mothers, not that 60%.
Well, about a third of them are, but probably a bit more than that are immigrant mothers. I mean, last time I checked, this is a pretty well functioning city.
London seems to be fairly well functioning.
So what's to worry about?
Well, I mean, it's up to people. Look, we're showing a trade-off. If the country is comfortable with 50% of the population being foreign-born, potentially speaking different languages and so on.
Oh, sorry. They don't speak English when they come here, though, you know?
Well, wherever the immigrants are coming from. I mean,
but we know where they're coming from. This is we've got we're right now in Nigeria. That's the number one source of immigrants there. They speak pretty good English. They're integrating very, very well. The second language after English is Polish. As far as I can work out, there's no integration problems there.
I don't think so. I mean, the one of the biggest political issues right now is immigration across Europe. Various political forces are rising up, complaining about immigration rates. The one thing I'd say is, okay, from an integration point of view, there's only really been one experiment, long-term experiment in integration, right? And not a kind of frontier economy like Australia or something like that. It's the United States. It's the United States, 1870 to 1920, right? And they have a big wave of Irish, Italian, Polish migration, and they integrate successfully. What was the largest share of the population that they took on? It was about 15%. That's the current rate in Britain overall on London, fair enough. If we say, okay, we're going to triple that, which is basically what we're saying we're going to triple that.
Wait, are we saying that?
Well, if we want to achieve the economic growth numbers and the stability.
Well, that's two pretty big ifs, right? And I'd love to know the error margin in that graph of yours, because let's face it, we all know about economic models that what we do, there's so many factors that you're imagining there. So you're showing this graph saying we're going to be 50% immigrants, in other words, half the people born here is pretty hard to run a society on that basis. What's it back?
Because it's experimental.
But where is your grants? Look at Australia, where 50% of the country the immigrants are working. That's a tremendous success.
In a frontier economy, it's never been tried.
So what are the ecosystem differences? Why wouldn't it? Well, we have steadily increased proportion of Muslims in this country. We have become greater as a result. We've got a Hindu Prime Minister, a Buddhist Home Secretary, a Muslim mayor running the Muslim First Minister of Scotland. As far as I can work out, this makes us a pretty damn good country.
I'm not anti-immigrant. I'm an immigrant.
You're talking about this. Sorry, this is what makes me uncomfortable. You're talking about this.
Because you're running into social phenomenon.
Yeah, it's called the United Kingdom. It works.
You don't know if 50% of immigrants works for them. You don't know the political statistics.
And nor do you is ever going to hit that level, right?
It will if you take into account, if you take simple assumptions, and by the way, they aren't complex assumptions. Economic models require complex assumptions. Demographic models really don't. It's just the number of people. It's the number of births, it's the actual rate versus the number of immigrants. It's a very simple model.
I'm going to be perfectly honest. I could barely tell a word of what they were saying. So
apologies
please explain that.
Apologies if the audio is for some reason not excellent.
Is him in the middle Fraser Nelson?
Yes.
Him on the left is Philip Pilkington.
Yes.
Okay.
So the summary was
from body language, I got a bad vibe.
Philip was genuinely uncomfortable, and he actually said to me after the event, I felt kind of bad having to pull the "well, I'm actually an immigrant" card because I shouldn't have been put in that position. And so Fraser was turning around and saying, well, if you look outside at London, we seem to be functioning rather well. We have a Hindu Prime Minister, we have a Buddhist Home Secretary, we have a Muslim Mayor of London, a Muslim First Minister of Scotland. The United Kingdom seems to be operating perfectly well, doesn't it? I would suggest that Fraser maybe not get cabs everywhere and step outside on the actual streets or to some of the areas of London which are nearly entirely or are entirely super diverse minorities and see how well they're functioning socially.
His name was David Amis.
Yes. Yeah.
Her name was Emily Jones. What an obscene wretch.
Yeah,
screw him.
From what I could tell, just from the body language, there was obviously some power dynamics going on there, and it seems that Fraser was almost entirely trying to format his questions into one, he was positioning himself in a rather smug sense with an unearned sense of moral superiority, because it seemed that what he was trying to do was fish out an answer to the, why have you got a problem with that, bro? What's the problem? Everybody's the same, bro. What's the problem? And get the, well, actually, group behavior affects a lot of things, and different groups behave in different ways, which is the honest truth of it. And I don't think there should be any shame in admitting it. But he was trying to fish that answer from Philip because then he has a blanket to just say, oh, you're racist then. Oh, you think that group behavior has effects on outcomes and has an effect of individuals' behavior? What do you mean? We're all individuals. Because what you say about the idea that even pointing out that there is demographic change going on means you can be labeled a racist. From what I can tell from my own analysis, the overriding assumption seems to be that if you as a British person, if you as a person with European ancestry who can be broadly classified as white, recognize yourself as a member of a group rather than just an unsituated individual out in a globalized world, well, then you are racist, because if you are white recognizing yourself as part of a group, these people conceptualize as the first step to fascism, which they see as the first step to genocide, realistically speaking, it all leads back, and this is why they want a Holocaust memorial outside of the Parliament of the UK, is because they see any sort of white group identity, even if that doesn't affect your individual actions, even if it just means that you recognize that I am part of a group, and it's more and more difficult not to see yourself as part of a group when we have other groups imported into the country who see themselves as group and situate themselves directly oppositional to our interests because they're pushing for more welfare, pushing for more open borders, pushing for all sorts of things that cause us detriment. They say, well, if you see yourself as a group, you're a Nazi.
Yeah,
That's what it all comes down to.
And Eric Kaufman has done work on this saying, okay, do you know what really makes things volatile and escalate to violence? Is if you gaslight people into saying, some people's psychological proclivity to see themselves as part of an ethnic group doesn't exist only for white people when it does exist for other ethnicities, because you are clearly being dishonest and using it as an instrument to destroy the country. Now, me personally, I don't have a white identity. I'm just an Englishman, right? I love my culture. I love the place that I come from. My skin color is subordinate to the place and time and beliefs that I have grown up with. And I don't want to see those go extinct. Because, funnily enough, if you flood the country full of people that don't have the same culture as me, premised in the idea of multiculturalism, and they do not assimilate, not nearly as successfully as Fraser Nelson seems to somehow believe that they are, then yeah, my culture will be driven to extinction. And I don't want that. I wasn't asked if I wanted that. It's not, this is something that actually...
Well, he's a man who fundamentally is out for his own interests and not the interests of our nation. That's what it comes across as. He's a traitor.
And so he turns around and says, okay, well, why can't you just adapt to the fact that your culture is going to be liquidated? Why can't we have, right? Couldn't our national story just be Britain becoming this new multicultural thing? He's asking Britons to accept the changing of their national story.
It's not Britain.
Try telling him that. I'm just going to play this and I'll summarize if the audio is not great again.
Okay, and one final question if you were in for the floor. This whole discussion, but anything you can answer, I'd be interested in it. I mean, Phil, you talk about immigration as basically being a function of the depletion in the number of working age. I understand that. And right now we've got, I forget the figure for immigration to Britain, is about 1 million a year or something like that. Now that is obviously a very big figure by our standards. But, and this is broadly speaking twice as many as the one before Brexit, so that is quite a big, perhaps unexpected consequence of leaving the EU. But this is happening, as far as I can work out, not because there aren't enough British-born people in the country. This is happening because right now we have a welfare system paying 5.3 million people not to work. There's a system, as far as I can work out, the gap, the vacuum sucking in migrant workers. The reason we have a worker shortage in this crisis is because right now the welfare system is back to the problem the EU tried to solve 14 years ago, where you've got like 20%, sometimes more, of our great cities on out of work benefits in the middle of a worker shortage crisis. And that, rather than any natalist issue, is why the immigrants are coming.
Well, I'm sure that part of the reason is that we have so many on out of work benefits. But if you just look at the birth gap that we have, what's 35% in this country, there literally are 35% fewer babies being born than there are 50-year-olds at the moment. So there is unarguably a mathematical shortage of people entering the labour force. You can plug that gap with immigration, or you can design yourself to economic stagnation. That's the model. And I think on the immigration point, you don't import immigrants as babies, you import them as adults, and immigrants grow old too, and then we need more immigrants to feed the workforce in order to provide. And I think, I probably take a different view to you on immigration. I do think a small amount of immigration is very, very positive for an economy. But there's no democratic consent for the kind of immigration we have right now. I mean, that's very clear from the polls. So the idea that we've increased that massively to the point where half of people aren't born in this country, nothing to do with being anti-immigrant or racist. It's about saying, where does our national cohesion come from? Where does our national story come from? If 1 in 2 people wasn't born here. And I just don't think there's democratic consent for that. And therefore, if we're not going to go down that model, government's got to look at a different model, which is how do we get more children, how do we enable parents to be more fulfilled and find families like they want.
And it's plausible that our national story becomes one similar to the United States and Australia, that we are in Britain, the original multi-ethnic state, that we are a country which successfully combines various races and cultures better than anywhere else in Europe.
But even America, as Philip said, the maximum number, the percentage of first-generation immigrants they've ever had is 15%. So you're still talking more than 3 times that level, which, as Philip said, is an experiment.
Why are we commanded to pretend that if we triple the most amount of immigration that America has ever seen in a landmass smaller than one of its states, that there's going to be no problems? That's just my deep and abiding frustration. Why are we commanded to pretend that there aren't going to be any cultural abrasions?
I mean, why does he pretend? Why does this Fraser gentleman, which I think is possibly an unearned term I've given him there, but why does he pretend that there isn't a tipping point? That there isn't clearly a tipping point when demographics hit a certain point, and reasonably, it seems to be when you have about 40% of an area becoming an out group, and 60% the in group. When all of a sudden they have a certain numbers advantage, especially when the in group sees themselves as an unsituated, completely atomized group of individuals rather than a cohesive unit. These people see themselves as more of a cohesive unit. Why does he not see that that will inevitably lead to negative consequences? The culture of an area is always determined by the culture of the majority of the people who live there. They don't have to assimilate. He pretends that they're assimilating. Most of them aren't. Are we going to pretend that London is the same city it was 40 years ago?
I suspect he does see and doesn't care.
I think he probably just doesn't interact with these people at all.
I suspect he's just exactly what he seems to be, a traitor scumbag who hasn't got the interests of us at heart at all. Like, I heard him say, sorry, who's paying him to say something like that? Surely it can't be his actual genuine opinion. And what if Britain just becomes a melting pot of nothing?
Well, actually...
Wait, sorry, what?
I think...
What are you talking about?
The last of the 3 clips, which is short, I think it does actually prove that he is painfully naive. Like, he's staggeringly unintelligent on this issue. The reason is, he genuinely says, well, who's saying that we need to fix this birth gap with migration? Who's suggesting this? It's like,
what's your whole argument based on?
the bloody Treasury Green Book says we need to set migration at this exact amount of people in order to keep economics at the same level. So it's premised on the idea that if we want to continue the line to go up, we've got to pull in this many people from around the world, particularly the third world after Brexit. Now, this is what all the NGOs decide to cite. And he's saying that... Anyway, I'll let him... Last time I'll let him speak.
I am just loath to let these people off the hook by saying it's naivete or something. These people are actually, quite clever in a sense, well-read, intelligent people, right?
Sometimes.
And
Okay.
and is he the chief editor?
I believe he's the lead editor.
Yeah, he's the lead editor of a very important newspaper.
So is Andrew Neil.
in Britain. Yeah.
Andrew Neil's not that bright.
You're going to be savvy. You're not going to be just completely ignorant of the argument.
You've got to be smart enough to be conniving to get to the sort of position that he's in.
The question he asks right here is basically, if you were trying to be conniving and do optics to do containment, you wouldn't ask this question because you look bloody stupid by a 19-year-old in the audience that turns around and gives you...
Selective ignorance is more effective than some people give it credit.
Well, I'll play this because I think this is probably just sums up how insulated he is and how disastrous that is.
You say people are wrong and think immigration is the solution. Is there anybody who genuinely says immigration is the solution for a declining birth rates? Yeah. No, wait. There was one thing. So, for example, I've missed this. I've missed this person making this speech. Who says this?
Lots of people on Twitter.
Is it? Okay.
Review of my last book, Tomorrow's People, reviewed in the Times. That was exactly the point David Rollins made. Why are we worrying about birth rates when we can just ship them in?
Right. So, Adam Smith, lots of people make it. Can I just add to this? It's very much so in the business class's interest to get immigrants in because it's a short-term fix. All they care about is the next year, 2 years, 3 years later force numbers. They don't care about 20 years down the line because they're in business. Why would they?
I'm going to try and give my perspective on what he was trying to do. He was trying to do what Morgoth calls playing the hatchling, which is the selective ignorance. I have only just emerged into the world. You're going to have to explain everything to me. It's a very effective debate tactic if you assume 2 things. 1, the audience is on your side, and 2, that the person that you're debating with doesn't actually know what they're talking about because
Possibly.
it puts all of the impetus on them to explain their position. Oh, I don't know a thing that you're talking about, even though you do, but it means that you have to explain it all. And if I catch that you aren't as well read on the subject as you say that you are, then I can immediately claim to have won the debate because, you're an idiot. It means you don't have to be in the position where you explain a single thing about your own position or why you believe what you believe. He was unfortunate enough in this position to be caught out by an audience who did know what they were talking about and weren't entirely on his side.
So what does Morgoth call it?
Playing the hatchling.
That's very good. I like that.
It's quite a good turn of phrase.
Yeah, that's
So
good.
I'll just finish on some new numbers that have come out from Migration Watch. They were under embargo until today, which is quite fortunate, but we get this. If we keep these migration numbers up, not only as they released before, will we by 2046 need 18 new cities the size of Birmingham to accommodate the housing, we would need 6,675 new schools, 165 further education colleges, 75 universities, and that's assuming that the migrants have the same number of children they do, even though that keeps dropping off, so you'd need more migrants, 2,640 GP surgeries, 135 hospitals, 7,785 new roads, where 2,235 bus lanes, and that's on migration alone, because as the ONS has said, our population would not be increasing unless it were for migration. How the hell are we going to facilitate all that? And why should we? Why are we entitled to roll out the infrastructure red carpet for a bunch of people who are chancers who hate us? Can anyone answer me this? Perhaps Fraser has an answer for this. But not only that, and I thought I'd finish on something maybe a bit bitterly funny. Go back to Miriam's point and Stephen's point. It's not just a case of national demographics. It's a case of actually there are people that really want families. There are people that after 40 say that I feel really bereaved because I wanted kids and I've never had them yet. And so
Lots of women who've been let down by freezing their eggs and it's been unsuccessful, or failed IVF treatments. Lots of them end up with heartbreak.
Yeah, and that was discussed in this. So we actually need early interventions to ensure that we don't have an entire generation of people that are heartbroken because they never had the children they wanted. So you're doing a disservice to them by not being honest about that. And journalists, in case you didn't hate them enough, Miriam, my friend originally tweeted this out, and I think Miriam nicked it. So I'll call you out on that. A journalist by the name of Alice Thompson in the Times, in 2017, she wrote the article, "Women of Britain, you must have more babies. A falling birth rate is bad news for the economy, but serious financial and career incentives are required to correct it." Perfectly reasonable take. As of last week, no thanks, we women won't breed for Britain. Miriam Cates wants us to have more babies. It's not so easy, says Alice Thompson. Wonder what changed. Wonder if personal circumstances might have increased the vitriol from this woman's article. And that seems to be the thing. It seems that personal circumstances, Fraser Nelson saying, what makes me uncomfortable about this conversation? This woman, I don't know her personal life choices, but I would assume things didn't maybe work out how she wanted, saying within 6 years, no, having babies is bad and I shouldn't feel culturally pressured to do so. The insecurities and bad consciences of some people are stifling a necessary debate and making it so that we are entering a demographic disaster and bereaving an entire generation of the families they actually want. I think that's fundamentally cruel, and you should stop being cowards, and we should have this conversation.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the book clubs, this one on Nora Vincent's Self-Made Man. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.